now we are at Genesis 18, and this is a son promised to Sarah. Sarah, who was renamed Sarah, she used to be Sarai, wife of Abram, who is now Abraham, father of many. Sarah meaning princess. Okay, so the big thing with the meaning of names there. Okay, the Lord appeared again to Abraham while he was camped out near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. Okay, so the Lord appeared again. That's the big takeaway out of that sentence for me. Belonging to Mamre. Okay, one day about noon, as Abram was sitting at the entrance to his tent, he suddenly noticed 3 men standing nearby. Okay, so I love... Well, let's keep going, and then I'll say what I love about this. I just happen to know this part. He suddenly noticed 3 men standing nearby. He got up and ran to meet them. Okay, culturally, like, running is a shameful thing for adult men, by the way, which I've picked up on, not just from footnotes in the Bible. I mean, like, that's just something I've heard a couple of times and has been pointed out, even in some movies. So that's interesting. He got up after suddenly noticing them, and he ran to meet them, welcoming them by bowing low to the ground. Okay, so this form of respect, he's already humbled himself by running. He runs and he bows low to the ground. Okay, this face down kind of deal. And I love that this starts off with the Lord appeared again to Abraham while he was. And like, this is how the Lord is appearing. 3 men here. Notice how Abraham is responding here. My Lord, he said, not capital L Lord, just my Lord. If it pleases you, stop here for a while. Rest in the shade of this tree while my servants get some water to wash your feet. Ooh, man, a lot of imagery here. And again, I'm trying to read all this with a fresh perspective, not knowing what comes ahead. But let's just take note of water and of washing feet. I love that there's resting in the shade of this tree while my servants get some water to wash your feet. Love, love, love this. Yeah, let's see how it plays out here. Let me prepare some food to refresh you. So it's got rest, it's got refreshing. Please stay a while before continuing on your journey. So he's saying rest, take shelter in the shade of this tree. Okay, let us just serve you, give you some water to wash your feet. I want to prepare some food to refresh you. So there's a purpose to refresh you. You're on a journey. I want you to continue that, but please would you stay for a while. Man, so good. Before continuing on your journey, continuing at verse 5, all right, they said, do as you have said. What's interesting about that is that Abraham just came up and he kind of, I don't know, he sets an example almost of like, I'm going to serve you, I'm going to do these things. And like, we've already seen that pattern in God. So I think that that's interesting to note that that example is being carried on. Okay, cool. Verse 6, so Abraham ran back to the tent, again humbling himself, and said to Sarah, quick, get 3 measures of your best flour and bake some bread. So notice here, like the Bible so far has been really specific when it talks about the best or the most excellent, you know, and the idea of first fruits and the idea of like, this is the best, this is the choice deal. So I don't think that's any different here. I love that it's not just like, okay, fix something new, I don't know, throw in some Hot Pockets. Like, this is like, I want you to get 3 measures of your best flour, bake some bread. Okay, so this is going to be more than enough bread. Very important to notice. And like, notice that that's bread as well, because I think that that imagery is going to become very, very important as well. Then Abraham ran out to the herd and chose a fat calf. So notice this would be the choice, the best. And then told a servant to hurry and butcher it. It's like, don't waste this opportunity. They're here. Let's not make them wait. Okay, let's go. Let's serve them. Let's serve them with our best, and let's do it as quickly as we can, with excellence. Though, man, that's good. Okay, when the food was ready, he took some cheese curds and milk and the roasted meat, and he served it to the men. So, like, he's making sure to get this done really, really quickly. He's using all of his resources. He's calling on his servants to serve as well. And then he personally, he could have just said, hey, all right, come here, serve us. Like, he does that. He humbles himself. So there's a timely response. There's a humble response. And yeah, it's just a faithful serving. Which is something that God said in chapter 17. Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Serve me faithfully. Live a blameless life. At the beginning of 18, it says, the Lord appeared again to Abraham. And then it clears this up, and it goes immediately to suddenly, Abraham notices these three men standing nearby. So it's an interesting thing that makes me wonder, is this God appearing in these people? And if Abraham is taking it that way, is that why he is serving them faithfully? That he just knows this? Because I don't know why else you would tie those verses together, why you would start it that way. The Lord appeared again. But the issue with taking it that way is that the Bible does not specifically say, the Lord appeared again to Abraham as three men. Here's the story. Like, it doesn't do that. So that is speculation. But again, that's why I'm doing this face value. This is what I'm trying to take out of this and see it with fresh eyes, just as this. So I wonder very often, I read into a lot of statements as I'm doing it, but I'm also trying to think in the context of things and why those are connected. And I'm noticing any little pattern that I can and trying to see if that pattern passes on, not just in a pattern of repetition, but a pattern that repeats in others as well. If there's characteristics of God and he's setting a certain example this way, do we see that in others? Is there a characteristic in a father or some other, and then their descendant? So that's why I'm kind of making note of these things. But here, I just want to be clear that as we continue this, that's where my head is in this. So that's interesting. He served it to the men. As they ate, Abraham waited on them there beneath the trees. So where they're resting and getting this refreshment, and they're getting this shelter and this shade, and he is serving them, Abraham waited on them. Okay, so he's been serving them faithfully, he's humbled himself, and now he's waiting on them. Served it to them, and he's waiting on them as a servant. And then, verse 9, where is Sarah, your wife? They asked him. So the big question here that helps to affirm why I think this is the Lord appearing through these three is, like, how would they know that? Like, Abraham is a successful man, he's got this big household, but does everybody know his wife is Sarah? It's interesting. So let's keep going and see how this plays out. In the tent, Abraham replied. So he gives the answer. 10. Then one of them said, about this time next year I will return, and your wife Sarah will have a son. So this is prophetic. This is speaking a future thing, and this is saying, here's how it's going to go down. I will return, and your wife Sarah is going to have a son. Like, so that's why it keeps affirming this to me, that this is the Lord appearing again to Abraham in the form of. So let's see how this plays out. And your wife Sarah will have a son, he said at verse 10. Continuing there, now Sarah was listening to this conversation from the tent nearby. She is not a part of this, but she is listening to this. And since Abraham and Sarah were both very old, and Sarah was long past the age of having children, she laughed silently to herself. So she did the exact same thing response-wise that Abraham did. But clearly she's going by Sarah at this, so I wonder that he didn't say, hey, you're going to be named Princess now. You're going to be named Sarah now. Also, you know, like, did he not reveal that, or did he reveal it and she's just still in doubt? I don't know. How could a worn out woman like me have a baby, she thought, and when my master, my husband, is also so old? So immediately she goes to the how questions, the same thing that Abraham did, the same thing that feeds most doubt. How? I am and he is, like, she's going down that route. And how often, like, do we find that question when we're having those doubts and when we're thinking of the hows and the hows? Like, I limit God because I put my limitations on him for some reason, or I just take God out of the equation. It's like, no, living faithfully and trusting God means me recognizing that the confidence and the faith that I have isn't in me or any other human, because we're all going to fall short of the glory of God, definitely, but also just we don't have all abilities, and we don't have all understanding, and we don't have all power, but God does. So confidence in my faith needs to be in him and him alone, and I don't need to worry about the hows. He's got that. I just need to worry about the wows and the worship and obeying and then responding when he calls something specifically out. So that's a big deal. She has that same thing, and then she questions herself. How can a worn out woman like me have a baby? She thought. And also, my master, my husband, he's he's pretty old. He's so old. He's 10 years older than her. She's like, how? And then 13. Then the Lord, all caps, said to Abraham, why did Sarah just laugh? Why did she say, can an old woman like me have a baby? So you have the Lord speaking directly to him. Interesting. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? Again, that's that question we have to ask and be reminded of all the time. Nothing is impossible for God. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? No, there's nothing too hard for the Lord. Love that he reaffirms with that. About a year from now, just as I told you, I will return and Sarah will have a son. So again, you have, as I have told you, I will return, Sarah will have a son. So boom, I believe that affirms that God is appearing in the form of this. And the Lord said to Abraham, as it's had one of them said. Now it says the Lord said. So that's those three different voices there. Interesting. Then the Lord said to Abraham, okay, I will return. Sarah will have a son. Verse 15, Sarah was afraid, so she denied that she had laughed. Because we've already seen a pattern of fear and of people like wanting to hide and denying things or kind of redirecting in their fear. So I love that. Sarah was afraid, so she denied. She denied because she was afraid. When you and I deny God, like we're afraid of things. We're afraid of the doubts that we have. We're afraid of those things. But is anything too hard for the Lord? No. So invite him into those questions, those doubts, those how moments, and just realize that most of the time our hardest how questions are just going to be reconciled with trusting the wow of God and the fact that he is able and almighty. And that's just how it is. But he said, that is not true. You did laugh. Sarah was afraid. She denied that she had laughed, but he said, that is not true. You did laugh. Like God acknowledges what the truth is in the situation. Oh, man. You did laugh. Oof. And then it makes a jump. This is interesting. It says this is what's going to happen in a year. She laughed just as Abraham had laughed. God appeared through those three people, is what I take from that. If you want to defend and say why not, then let's debate it. I'm not the end all be all. This is just how I'm taking it as face value. How are you taking it? Abraham intercedes for Sodom. Okay, so now this is where it kind of continues here, but it's closing this part. 16, then the men got up from their meal and they started on toward Sodom. Abraham went with them part of the way. So they're continuing their journey now. They did take audience and rest and renewal and food and get served and get waited on by Abraham. And they did speak, I'm going to return and this is what's going to happen. She's going to have a baby. Even though you doubt it, even though she doubts it, even though you laugh, and even though now I'm acknowledging she laughed as well, that's why your son's going to be called Isaac, which means he laughs. So I think that was just an extra reminder and nod, and also ties Sarah into that equation, where she's experienced it, and we see that doubt in her as well. And I think that that's important for us. As the person who is hearing directly from God and the person who might be on the outside, experiencing someone else experiencing God. Yeah, interesting. Then the men got up from their meal, started on towards Sodom. Abraham went with them part of the way. Should I hide my plan from Abraham? The Lord asked. For Abraham will become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. So notice, like, he's reaffirming these things. Abraham is going to be a blessing to many, okay, and he's going to become this great mighty nation. He's going to become this. This is interesting that we get this musing out loud, because it doesn't say Lord is speaking to anyway, just the Lord asked. Should I hide my plan from Abraham? All right, at verse 19 he picks up, I have singled him out so that, those are big statements to me, he will direct his sons and their families to keep the way of the Lord and do what is right and just. So I am doing this, and I've singled him out, and I'm making him a father of many nations, so that he will direct his sons and their families, their descendants, to keep my ways, the way of the Lord, to do what is right, to live a faithful and blameless life, to obey. Man, that is good. Then I will do for him all that I have promised. Then I will do for him all that I have promised. Let me look at other translations for a second, because it's almost like the Lord is saying, if he responds faithfully and does this, then I will. I have chosen him that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. That the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken to him. And yeah, okay. That the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. So, interesting. I'm curious as to the call and response nature of that, the obedience. Because God says, I will be faithful, I will keep this covenant. And yet, there is a part that is like, hey, here's your part of the covenant. Okay, and here we see kind of a reminder of that, I think. I have singled him out so that he will direct his sons and their families to keep the way of the Lord and to do what is right and just. Okay, I expect for him to keep these ways and to keep this sign of the covenant and to deal with the circumcision, and to be obedient and faithful, live a blameless life. Then I will do for him all that I have promised. If he keeps his part of the covenant, they keep their part of the covenant, I will keep my part of the covenant everlasting. So it's an interesting thing that this agreement now has these two sides of it. The other covenant with the rainbow, where God's saying this rainbow will be a sign, this is me signing this covenant, that I will never destroy all of the earth with a flood again. That required nothing on our part. He didn't say, and here's your part of this. He just said, go, be fruitful and multiply. Interesting. So here we see this hinging on a faithful response and keeping that covenant on both sides. Nice. Good thing to note there. Then I will do for him all that I have. So verse 20. So the Lord told Abraham. So he says, should I hide my plan from Abraham? Then he says, I've singled him out. I'm going to let him in on this. And here's him letting it in on it. The Lord told Abraham, I have heard that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah are extremely evil, and that everything they do is wicked. So I have heard, okay, and then notice how he follows this up. I am going down to see whether or not these reports are true. Then I will know. Which is interesting. God is all-knowing so far as we have seen. But here we get this interesting perspective. Notice there's been a pattern of being seen and being heard. We've seen that a little bit. And even in the seeing, even going back into creation, you've got Adam and Eve getting to see all, and then God speaks this, here's the reason, here's what it is, here's what you need to do. And you have been seen, and I have seen you. And when there was sin, like, they tried to cover it up so it could not be seen. They were trying to hide, and they didn't want to speak these things. It's really interesting. Man, so many layers. But here you have, God, I have heard that people there, and now I'm going down to see. So this idea of going down to, I noticed the elevation part of that statement, and that's something you can read into or not. I choose a little to, yes, but whether or not these reports are true, then I will know. So God is also saying, you're going to hear some things, but you need to make sure to actually stop and see if those are true as well. So he understands that those things are tied together, and is kind of setting that pattern for Abraham and even for us. Have you heard all these things? Okay, well, have you seen them? Okay, who has? Why did they say it? Interesting, as God goes to actually see this and interact with it. 22, the two other men went on towards Sodom, but the Lord remained with Abraham for a while. So the Lord being the Lord in those three men, as the Lord appeared, two of them go on ahead, and the Lord remains with Abraham for a while. Abraham approached him and said, will you destroy both innocent and guilty alike? That is a big question. Man, I mean, just as a person of faith, do you, golly, so many people right now, to tie this into a timely thing, COVID is going on at this moment, and there are a lot of people that are dying from this. And early on, there's always like the doomsdayers and the people who just try to fearmonger faith. And what happens is you get these public outcries where they're just trying to say, this is a sign, and God is destroying the wicked people through this. And in our mind, like, we're quick to really question a lot of those things. Like, even when a natural disaster happens, it's like, why, God? Is this a punishment? And I think, I just want to take note of this specific point, is that Abraham is asking a question that a lot of us naturally kind of want to wonder. And the reason is because we're trying to get at not even this idea of justice, which is kind of written into us, but more specifically, it's us really asking, God, are you really trustworthy? Are you really a good God? Because if you're killing innocent people and the guilty, then I don't know. So I love that Abraham actually asks this question, and I want to take note of how God responds, but also how Abram approaches this, and as we move forward and see just things happening that God does, or that are, like everybody was taken out by a flood. In our minds we're like, all of those people couldn't have been wicked. Could they? There had to be some innocent people that just died in that flood. But that's not what it says. God says all of their thoughts are we all have turned toward him. The only righteous one is Noah, and these other people who are a part of his household, like they're going to be blessed through Noah, and I'm going to bless future generations through them. I'm going to hit this reset button. But it came at a great cost. So many people died, and we see that as like this punishment from the Lord. But what it is also is a deliverance and making a way for future generations, and for you and I, in our guilt and in our innocence. But so far it's pointing to the idea that there is no innocent, and that's really the hard thing to reconcile. But I'm sure that will be revealed as we keep going on. Sorry for the side note. So, will you destroy both innocent and the guilty alike? 24. Suppose you will find 50 innocent people within the city. Will you still destroy it and not spare it for their sakes? That's 50 people. Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the innocent with the guilty. Why? You would be treating the innocent and the guilty exactly the same. Surely you wouldn't do that. Should not the judge of all the earth do what is right? So, like, Abraham is perfectly voicing those things that concern us, and that are like the how. Not even the how at this point of like, how are you going to do that? But the how could you? So again, you invite God into those things. You approach him with those questions. I love that. Should not the judge of all the earth do what is right? Because we've already established, even in the very beginning, that God not only knows the worth of things, but he's able to judge between good and evil. And, oof, so good. Verse 26, and the Lord replied, if I find 50 innocent people in Sodom, I will spare the entire city for their sake. 27, then Abraham spoke again, since I've begun, let me go on and speak further to my Lord, even though I am but dust and ashes. So I love that he approaches him with reverence and knowing his place and stating his place. Just like he fell face down into the ashes in worship and he served and waited on the Lord just a second ago. Now he's saying, hey, you're my Lord, you are almighty, okay, and I am serving you. I don't dare, but I'm going to, and I just ask for you to give me audience in this. Would you? Since I've begun, let me go on and speak further to my Lord. Even though I am but dust and ashes. Suppose there are only 45. Will you destroy the city for the lack of 5? And the Lord said, I will not destroy it if I find 45. Then Abraham pressed his request further. So he pushes in a little bit more. He says, suppose there are only 40. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it if there are 40. Please don't be angry, my Lord. Of Abraham's boldness as he's approaching the Lord. Let's take note of this example. Man. I'm also taking note that he's not only approaching him boldly and pressing this, okay, but he's also doing this because his concern is for others, right? Yes, there's a concern of the judge of the world, right, and his character, but specifically, he's really concerned about these innocent people. We know that Lot's among this, as he's kind of settled from before, but we'll get there. Anyway, please don't be angry, my Lord. He says, okay. Abraham pleaded, let me speak. Suppose only 30 are found. The Lord replied, I will not destroy it if there are 30. 31, verse 31, sorry. Then Abraham said, since I have dared to speak to the Lord, let me continue. He's like, I'm already in it this far. I might as well. This pushing the Lord's patience. But it doesn't seem to be doing that. Suppose there are only 20. The Lord said, then I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Again, for the sake of. God keeps saying, for the sake of. And then 32, finally Abraham said, Lord, please do not get angry. I will speak but once more. Suppose only 10 are found there. And I love this. Lord doesn't say, shut up, kid. He doesn't do those things that as a parent, most of us are like, stop with the questions. Like the Lord said, then for the sake of the 10, I will not destroy it. The Lord went on his way when he had finished his conversation with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his tent. For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. I love that. I think that, for our sake, like we can look at all of these things and realize that does drive a lot of God's decision and his actions and what he calls people to, but specifically, thinking of the most extreme punishment and thing that we've seen God do so far with the flood, I think that's interesting. Like, he could have just completely started over and taken humans, man, his creation, out of the equation completely and just started over with man 2.0 or whatever. But what he does is for the sake of future generations, for the sake of this one righteous man, Noah, this faithful remnant, right? He makes a way. And I think that it's interesting that God's about to deal severely since he's heard this about Sodom and Gomorrah, now he's going to go down and see what's going to be just in this situation. But you have this heart of Abraham who, has been very concerned in certain areas of God's how, or taking some matters into his own hands. You see him doing this. And I could question those motivations just like you could all day. Part of it might be a control thing, and it might be the question of how. But this seems to be more in the questioning of how could you. And I love that God says, for their sake. Look, their sakes are important to me. Yeah, for the sake of them. Look, you don't know this, I guess, but because one man was righteous, I spared him and his family, okay? I spared their souls, and it deals with this proximity of things. And because you are here and you're concerned with them, I'm willing to spare this, but would he have done it anyway? is really the question. But whether he would have or not, the point is that we see the Lord agreeing to something and saying, okay, you've interceded on their behalf. You've questioned these things. And I'm telling you, yeah, for their sake, um, I will spare them. So I'm excited to see what happens next, and I hope you are too.